This is a conversation with Olli Vallo, a teacher, innovator, and now an EdTech strategist at UNICEF. Olli has spent years exploring how technology can transform education, from his early work with music in the classroom to evaluating hundreds of learning solutions with Education Alliance Finland. In this episode, we talk about the global learning crisis, the role of AI and accessibility in education, and how wars and conflicts affect the future of learning. Most of all, we explore what gives hope to the next generation of students and teachers around the world. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider giving this podcast a like and subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it means a lot and helps others discover these ideas. Hello, Olli. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Christoph. Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, we are meeting again. It's our second interview. I encourage everyone to see our first episode, which we will link in the description. And for now, let's start with the first question, because you recently transitioned to a role at UNICEF's Global Learning Innovation Hub. And I am wondering, how has this shift influenced your perspective on EdTech at a global scale?
Yeah. True. Yeah, I started at the UNICEF Learning Innovation Hub about 2 months ago. It has been very busy 2 months, even though it's summertime. But we have this application call open for EdTech companies to apply to be listed in UNICEF-led EdTech repository called the Learning Cabinet. So naturally, now I've been seeing hundreds of applications from EdTech providers coming from all around the world, and I must say that having done EdTech evaluations several years in the past with the Education Alliance Finland, but we mainly, like almost all the evaluation cases, they came from Western countries like Global North. And now with UNICEF, we get much more applications from EdTech providers from Africa, for example, and that is just that is very nice. It's it brings a whole new element for the world of and my work investigating the EdTech market and the quality of EdTech solutions.
But is it just your shift in perspective because you've changed your role, or is it a global trend you see?
Well, hard to say really, because I was out there. There are certain global trends for sure that I can also see, like of course, obviously, how AI is affecting on the operations of companies and their abilities, for example, to produce content. But this new observation of and me getting to know, for example, African EdTech companies and EdTech companies coming from the global south. I I would assume that there have been EdTech companies coming from the global south for a long time already. But now only when I started working at UNICEF, I've had this opportunity to actually get to know them and see their solutions.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And do you see different problems that they are trying to solve than those global north companies?
Well, upskilling is for example, it seems it's a very like a tiny glimpse of solutions that what I've seen. It just like who happened to see our application call and ended up submitting. So I can't make any too like jump to
Good
conclusion that
assumptions.
this is a representative
Uh-huh.
picture of African EdTech companies, for example, what we see. But one observation is that there are quite many companies focusing on upskilling and even like a linking the working life with the learning experiences, and that seems to be at least one like a type of solution that we've received quite a few applications from companies who focus on that.
What role do you think should international organizations like UNESCO or UNICEF play in regulating or guiding the tech market?
Well, I could say there's a like a sort of a leader role. I think after all, UNICEF and UNESCO being highly influential organizations in education and how's the life of children of the world. So definitely, when the use of digital technologies become more and more popular in education, of course, big global organizations need to be uh, aware, need to show ways. Most of all, when it comes to safety of children when using digital solutions, that's one high priority. And of course, for example, UNICEF, we have a lot of expertise in that area. Um, but yeah, it's I think in very concrete level, what we try to do now with our EdTech for Good initiative, um, we try to in the big picture, we try to tackle the learning crisis, and technology is one quite obvious key solution that can help to tackle the learning crisis. But very often the question uh, among school decision makers and education sector decision makers in the countries we work with is that the edtech market is so fragmented. So we trust that it would be beneficial to start leveraging from the use of technology to improve education, but at the same time, it is one of the first challenges that we need to overcome to understand that what are the solutions out there, what are some good solutions that we can trust on,
Mhm.
that are, for example, safe and of high pedagogical quality and proven effective. But how do we find those? So that's the reason that's the
Mhm.
role that in our initiative we are taking to help the education decision makers to find those edtech solutions that they can trust on.
Mhm. You mentioned learning crisis, and that's something that I would like you to expand maybe if you could. Uh, what kind of learning crisis do you mean? Because as far as I observe, the beast has many names. What do you mean exactly, or what your organization maybe means exactly by learning crisis?
Yeah, well, just to share some key figures that describe the global uh, situation when it comes to how well education systems work on global scale. So at the moment, according to the latest statistics, there's about 250 million children out of school who don't have the possibility to go to school. Uh, and then this is just an estimation, but it's estimated that there's a lack of 44 million teachers globally,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
70% of 10-year-olds in low and middle income countries, 70% of 10-year-olds cannot understand and read a simple text. So when we discuss about learning crisis, sometimes in some presentations we call it learning catastrophe. But it's just to highlight how severe the situation is. And basically, we could say that on global scale, uh, if we look at the education system, it doesn't work too well if 70% of low and middle income country children don't learn to read in school.
So you mean that from two perspectives, one from a student or competence level, and the other on the teacher shortage, as we all know. And how do you think, for example, EdTech can support teachers without overwhelming them or, I don't know, replacing their roles? It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's definitely it's not an easy thing to do. But at the same time, if we think about the situation that you have for these students in classroom, and maybe in your school you haven't been able to find a qualified teacher to teach these children, but there's an adult who takes care of the children and tries to help them to learn. It takes quite a lot from the adult's pedagogical skills to be able to direct the learning experience in the right direction for the children to learn to read, for example. If it's purely offline, like there's no, you might have textbooks or you might have some like written exercises, but it's basically up to the teacher to instruct the student that what did you do wrong, what did you do right, what you should be doing next, how do you get the answers right, or how do you build the skill that we are learning. Now, if we take an interactive solution there, let's say that these students, or half of them, or some of them have tablets, for example. And in those tablets, you would have pedagogically high quality, proven effective learning solution that is interactive, that when the student is, for example, learning basic numeracy, the application asks a question, the student replies. If the reply is not right, the application might explain the student in a like valid, justified way that this is the reason why you didn't get it right. Think about these things and now try again. So that kind of pedagogical design and instruction, pedagogical instruction that the EdTech solution can provide for the student, it can be really, really significant. So in the most concrete level and a little bit simplified, that can be the role of EdTech. Of course, there are plenty of other use cases as well.
Yeah, this is the first one that comes to your mind when you think about it. That's true. And I like that you stress the importance of the pedagogically valid solutions, like the evidence-based tools. And I wonder, maybe you have a perspective on what criteria should schools or maybe even governments or organizations use to evaluate the impact of educational technology. I mean, what the criteria should be to evaluate evidence-based edtechs.
Well, at UNICEF, we have developed our own proprietary assessment criteria to evaluate the quality and impact potential of an EdTech solution. We have 5 different focus areas. We always start by verifying that the solution that we assess is safe. So we look at what user data is collected, how it's handled, and make sure that it's treated in fair ways. Then the
like
second,
in cybersecurity safe.
Yeah. So that the user data, for example, doesn't get sold to third parties and so on. So it needs to be safe. Well, of course, safety in digital world, it means other things like who are you able to communicate with when you use the solution and so on. But basically, the first focus area focuses on safety. Second one focuses on the evidence, so that if you have let's say a little bit later stage EdTech provider that has been around for a while, has developed the solution, has been able to implement it in fairly wide scale, many of them have also along the way conducted different kinds of research. Uh, First of all, they probably have had some kind of theory of change to begin with, so that before they develop the application, they might have had like a rationale that why this kind of activities and this kind of content would be beneficial and would improve learning. So that's the starting point, to have this kind of theory of change. Then moving on, many EdTech providers have conducted empirical research. So, for example, they've given the solution to a certain group of students, and then had a control group who didn't have the same solution in use, and tried to replicate the other like circumstances and parameters to be the same, and then tested that, okay, how now, after using the solution for few months, how much these students have learned, and then compared to this control group, how much they have learned, and so on. So, and of course, there are many different ways to conduct this kind of efficacy research, or find evidence. But basically, what we do when we assess the solution, we ask, what evidence you have. Please share it with us. It can be theory of change, it can be certifications, it can be efficacy research. But we go through that and try to understand that what real evidence there is that this solution is actually helping to improve the learning outcomes. So that's the second focus area. Third, so then the third focus area focuses on the actual design of the solution. So we call it design for children. So we look into how the application or the solution actually works. How is the UX? How is the pedagogical quality? How the content is delivered, and so on. So that happens through us actually testing the solution, so on. Then fourth focus area focuses on the scalability potential. It is important for us, if we list the solution in the learning cabinet, that we know that this EdTech provider is also able to scale up the use of the solution in like even like a nationwide deployment, so that and one important aspect is that we need to know that we can expect it to work in the global south context, where internet connection might not be the same as in like a Finnish classroom, or the devices might be a little bit different, and so on. So we check those aspects that affect on, are they able to scale up in global south context. And then the fifth focus area focuses on accessibility. Leave no one behind is the official title of the focus area, but that's basically ensuring that if the solution is used by, let's say, with students with limitations or learning disabilities and so on, it needs to be possible for them to use it as well. So this is the like very high level, but this is the criteria. These are the 5 different focus areas that we look into when we assess a solution.
I find it interesting that you mentioned accessibility here. I think like in education especially, accessibility is one of the kind of new things that we haven't thought about it before. Do you have the same notion that now with the new WCAG regulations, we have like a new perspective on that, and it now became more important, or am I wrong?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I guess oftentimes it goes in a way that when there's a new regulation and it's made obligatory for providers to pay attention to certain aspect, then they start taking care of that even better. Of course, there are companies that operate differently, who have paid a lot of attention to accessibility, for example, even before any regulation. But yeah, I've seen that also like years ago, with new regulations in Finland. I noticed that, for example, the digital textbook providers, basically they just needed to make the books to follow the accessibility criteria.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's very important. It's very important, and I think it's good for the company as well to think about that. It can improve the user experience for everyone.
Hmm. That's an interesting perspective I got from Ania Doliszna. She's working with us on our educational solutions, and she's into accessibility a lot, especially those web content accessibility guides. And she told me that you don't have to look at accessibility like that's directed for people with disabilities. Think of for example, parent who is deprived of sleep and is very tired and want to do something, paralysis with his eyes, and want to do something in a, I don't know, some kind of application, and you have to make your application accessible, easily to understand for those people who are, in different situations. And for example, I don't know, very dim light in your room, and you have to be able to read on your phone, some kind of small font. So the accessibility in education, I guess, is really crucial, and we didn't think of that before.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The line was cutting off a bit during your talk, but yeah, I agree.
Hmm.
It's very important. Don't they say that if you look at the time spendage of a teacher when teacher works in the classroom, the the most of the time that teacher dedicates to students
Hmm.
are the ones who need extra help.
Yeah.
And it would be a shame if there is a digital solution in use in a classroom, and teacher would need to spend 80% of the time with helping students because of the problems with the accessibility of the solution.
Yeah.
So
So we
definitely not.
spent a lot of time to help students to catch up to those who are slightly better, and not spending that much time for those who can excel and to grow those great ones.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it seems like this technology and focus on accessibility can a little bit bring a balance here.
Yeah, it should. I think.
Yeah, and this touches the next question I'd like to ask you, because as technology becomes more prevalent in classrooms in general, we can see that trend. What skills do you believe teachers will need to develop to remain effective and maybe even present?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, and maybe kind of a like starting point for any change that might happen
Hmm.
in the classroom, because um, if we think about use of technology or bringing any new methods in the classroom, the gatekeeper is always the teacher. Um, it's of course uh, in on government level, decisions can be made, and then teachers are expected to start using certain tools and so on, and it's one way of working, like a top down as well, bringing new solutions in classrooms, but at the same time, uh, at the end of the day, it's always the teacher who still makes the decision that how is this new solution put in practice in my classroom. um, and and of course it's a big problem, I think, in every country in the world, that um, there is not only considering the technology solutions, but other like best practices in teaching and good pedagogical practices. It takes a lot of effort to train the teachers to understand the benefits of any new methods that they're expected to start using, and get them motivated, and like basically prepare them to adopt, whether it's a technical solution or something else. But they need to you need to get a buy-in from the teacher, and only
Yeah.
after that, I think whatever new you're bringing in the classroom, it has the potential to work. When it comes to the skills of the teachers, it's it is one challenge for EdTech developers. I think that like maybe in some classrooms you can just give the application to the teachers, and you can trust that the teacher knows how to how to use it and how to make most of it. Uh, but at the same time, uh, you would not be successful like in wider perspective if that's what you like. That's the basis for how you implement your solution in classrooms. It needs to uh, consider the teacher support and maybe even give enough uh, like a guidance for the teacher to use it pedagogically in purposeful way, so that
Hmm.
it
And do you think?
yeah.
Yeah, and do you think those criteria you mentioned before, like verifying, basing on the research, on evidence, having kind of a framework that brings new tools or verify their efficacy, do you think this is a way to like encourage teachers to use the tool that was somehow scrutinized?
Yeah, well, it's a good point. Maybe not something that we would think every day, uh, but at the same time, it does make sense that if you're given a random tool, if you're a teacher and somebody gives you a random tool, and if
You
you
know
are
what to expect.
yeah, and if you are proud of what you do, and you know your students, and you know the pedagogy that works in your classroom, and somebody just gives you a tool,
Hmm.
I think it's very healthy situation that the teacher would maybe like at least a little bit question, okay, what is the
Hmm.
benefit that this is supposed to bring, and if they have that question in mind, it might give extra confidence if it could be told to the teacher that this has actually been assessed and these are the benefits that it's proven to provide. It might even like bring that like a necessary context for the teacher, that why should I be using this, and trust on the solution and see the benefits
Hmm.
from early on.
Yeah, so this draws an image where the solutions are coming from top to the bottom, like from the governments, organizations, NGOs, and so on, from researchers to the classrooms. And what about the plain old improvisation? Like, for example, some teachers, some group of teachers, maybe just one teacher tests some tool without research, without evidence. They are just giving it a try, experimenting on their classroom. It appears to be good, so they grow. They say about it to their friends, to their co-workers. Next teachers are using it, so it's grows like on a vineyard, and this way expands. Wouldn't it be like a more natural way? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the most common way how technology solutions
Is it
get.
the most common way, you think? Is it?
Uh, yeah, I would expect it's of course nowadays, like for example in Helsinki where I live, um,
Mm-hmm.
what used to happen in classrooms, even when I was teaching, was that teacher finds a solution online, thinks, okay, this is
Mm-hmm.
free to use, okay, I can just like give this to my students, and then they can start using it. Nowadays, for example, in Helsinki, there's a better system in a way that as a teacher you're not allowed and you're not supposed to do that. But first, if you find a solution, you should contact Department of Education say that we would like to use
Wow.
this solution, and maybe it costs something, so you can apply for budget, and then they have a system to verify whether the solution is okay to use or not okay to use. And this has come along with the GDPR and so on. So you cannot just like take something and bring it to your students. However, those solutions that teachers are using only, and like if solutions are free,
If they don't involve students. Mhm.
yeah, if they don't involve students, like let's say Canva, for example, it's hugely popular among teachers globally, and teachers use it to prepare lessons and make materials and so on, and then they use it, and then students are not using it. So those are completely fine. But of course, it changes if they, for example, want to buy something from the platform and they expect the school to pay for that. Then it needs to go through at least some kind of process that is it okay to use this solution.
That makes the EdTech growth very slow, isn't it? Because it stifles innovation a little bit. Because you can test something up to some extent, but then you have like the concrete ceiling that you're that's very difficult to go over.
Yeah. It's if you make it tech that is targeted for like institutional use, like for basic school, public education systems, uh, I would expect it to be very slow to grow,
Mm-hmm.
because it's it needs to be like, you need to be able to enter this kind of official system and prove
Yeah,
that you are good for the system, and so on. So it's a very different
and
ballgame compared to like a consumer apps.
yeah, it is very different, uh, and there's something that's first thing you need to understand when you come to EdTech market, that the selling process is very long and not linear.
Yeah.
Yeah, but on the related note, I wanted to ask you another question. There is a narrative that technology can democratize access to education. And how realistic is this? And maybe what conditions need to be met for it to happen?
Yeah. I think the some very obvious cases are those situations that student is not able to go to school.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
if it's possible to participate remotely, or even get some like a high quality learning um, solutions available through the use of tablets or computers, then of course it's one aspect. Um, yeah, like in theory, I think that's how it is, and technology has the potential, but of course there are so many different factors affecting on whether it actually happens or not. One being just the technical infrastructure that is available in a country. Uh, then of course this kind of like I guess the same applies to radio and TV as well. That like if we go like 100 years back, the only way to educate yourself was pretty much uh, going to some like a institute where somebody would teach you, and you would have access to library and books and knowledge. Uh, but nowadays, of course, with the use of technology, it is possible to get access to knowledge and so on. But then again, I think like one quite like a might play like a critical role in this equality aspect is the access to AI. Um, like if I just think myself, like how big of a help AI is in my everyday life, ask questions, I can improve my understanding, and I can learn, and it helps me to do different kinds of tasks. I get a huge help from it. If I wouldn't have access to AI, it would already, and we're still at the very beginning with the what kind of help AI can provide. So if I wouldn't have access to AI, it would actually like decrease my chances for learning and improving and doing meaningful tasks quite a lot, and like even innovating and coming up with solutions and so on. I saw this keynote speech at the Helsinki Education Hub a few months ago, where the speaker was suggesting that AI should be like treated like access to AI should be provided similarly as access to libraries, so that you would
Mm,
have like a
okay.
public good initiative that would give people access to safe AI, and it would maybe democratize the access, and it somehow resonated with me, that idea.
And do you think that the use of AI in educational tools can help solve those like literacy? Because clearly it can help with a teacher crisis, like teacher shortage crisis. But can it help with literacy as well? Have you
Um,
seen such applications?
you mean like a purely AI based applications that would help with literacy?
Well, I mean the general trend. Maybe AI is just a part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose already for quite some time, AI has been part of different uh, digital learning solutions. Um, in some, maybe it has played bigger role. Some other solutions very small role. And of course, there are plenty of like this kind of false promises have been around as well. And some providers might claim that we use AI and this is how it revolutionizes your learning experience as part of our solution. But at the same time, it might be like a bit empty promise. Uh, but of course, there are these solutions that are able, for example, to use AI to make the learning experience more personalized, so that if you are like learning to read or improving your reading fluency, the topics you read about might be tailored uh, based on your interests, and so it's more personal. Of course, the difficulty level might be adapted to your skills level and so on. And AI is great in doing that. Uh, but yeah, for sure, it
But
helps in so many ways. Yeah.
yeah, and that's something I would like to talk with you about as well. When evaluating learning solutions, how do you balance this innovation and use of those new tools like AI and maybe VR, AR? There are multiple like the ways that the things we wanted to integrate into education, and how do you balance it with pedagogy? And maybe there are features or kind of a solutions that you think that they often look impressive, but they don't improve learning.
Yeah, well, that's for sure it happens, and when we evaluate the solutions, this is one key question we have when we focus on assessing the pedagogical quality of the solution. Uh, it doesn't happen by default, for sure. Like you might think that because AI chatbots are so smart nowadays, that you can just implement one to be part of your solution, and then it's
And
automatically
boom,
helpful for the learner.
yeah.
Uh, but at the same time, I think it can provide some benefits, but I think there is at least equal risk that it it provides some like negative aspects, giving false information or like affecting on the motivation of the student and so on. So it's a big debate at the moment. In some countries, you're not allowed to use AI solutions in schools, and in some countries they go like a full on, like buying some AI tools for all the students in the whole country. Uh, but at the same time, I do think that uh, it has a lot of potential, and this applies to all use of technology in education if it's designed pedagogically justified ways, and it's of high quality, uh, and if it's implemented in a meaningful way, then you can actually get the the potential, the most of it, and like you can actually start expecting it to improve learning. But if it's just like a little bit randomly, like testing, just like would this be good, uh it might be that it causes more harm than benefits.
Hmm. And would you say that the use of AI agents is rather the impressive but do not improving learning, but or the otherwise? What's more often from your perspective?
Well, I have only seen a few cases, and like investigated a little bit deeper. Only a handful of solutions that have like a AI as like a significant part that affects on the learning experience. Those cases have been very good. So
Hmm.
you might
Okay.
get but all those cases have been designed very carefully, like thinking about not like implementing AI for the sake of it or because it sounds trendy and we might get some investor money, but implementing AI because it actually like uh, it it serves the purpose what we try to do in the first place with our solution, and it's just the right fit that helps the users of our solution to meet their goals. So, but at the same time, I should be evaluating like hundreds of AI based solutions in order to actually make sense. But my experience is like companies are very smart, like especially if the company has already, like if it's not super early stage startup, but they actually do have users, they do have like revenue, and they do have business to run. I don't think I haven't seen any of those companies to like just randomly implementing like something clumsy AI solutions to be part of their product, because they also understand that it's a like whatever change we make to our product, it's always a risk. So we need to think carefully every like even simple features, that what is good, what is not. Uh, so that's my
And do you
experience.
and do you think that the AI is a bubble in EdTech? Because from
Yeah.
what you're saying, you see a sound reason to implement AI in multiple tools, but maybe some of them are just like not necessary, and they will break the business model, so that the tools will blow up when the market is like less favorable.
Yeah, hard to say. I guess if it meets the definition of a bubble, it would mean that there would be like a big chunk of money poured into those
Hmm.
those solutions.
Yeah, and we don't see
But
that.
yeah, we don't see that in the edtech field in general. So I don't really know if it really is a bubble. Of course, I think let's say if you're a edtech startup and you apply to an accelerator, or if you seek investor money, you probably have to like somehow explain that how do you use AI. Unless if you completely ignore it, it's probably likely that people don't like think you have your future thinking and so on. But with these companies, the foothold in the market is always so small that I wouldn't see like investors or anybody like run after these companies just because they have something done with that includes AI.
And as we saw in to 2020, year 2020, after the COVID, we saw a like strong increase of funding. Money was flowing into EdTech solutions like crazy. Do you think we now of course it's not. Do you think it can return or like AI? Because a year ago I thought AI could be such a catalyst that will enhance investors' interest in educational solutions. But now looking at the numbers, I quite frankly don't see it. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, my perspective is exactly the same. I think that why, and this is like I'm not an expert in this area or raising investor money for EdTech companies, but my just like observation is that the reason why investors invested in EdTech solutions during COVID was that there was the traction was like increasing
Mm-hmm.
so fast. So many solutions gained so many users in short period of time, or even started making so much revenue in short period of time, and had that growth potential and opportunities to grow that required investor money. So that was I think that was like the maybe more like a not like how their products were, but more like how much traction they got, how much revenue they were making, how many users they were able to get every day. So uh, when that doesn't happen, I don't think that happens with AI. It might even be like if you use AI in very smart ways, it might be better for an edtech company not to mention that if you target the school market,
Yeah.
because it also scares people. Uh, but or at least not try to highlight it too much.
Like
But
your main feature. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I wouldn't expect this to be the same. But of course you never know. Maybe it only takes one like a really big success story of a company who grew from zero to billion to unicorn in a very short period of time, because they were doing something with AI. With that kind of stories, if they start happening, then I would guess that then it would be like a relatable narrative for investors and uh, and tech developers as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'd like to move on to a little bit different subject, but not less important and not less prevalent to these days. And I wanted to ask you about education and global conflicts, because we all can see that global conflicts, global military conflicts between the countries are disrupting schooling for millions of children worldwide, or the students every age. From your perspective, how can education play a role in ensuring continuity of learning in this fragile context?
Yeah, well, I must say that I don't have experience working in this type of context. Not even so much evaluating solutions that which main purpose would be to help learners in conflicts and like refugee camps and so on. Of course, we have evaluated solutions that are being used in such conditions, and of course you can see from the design of the application that they might made some very smart like a design decisions in order for this application to be to be possible to use in let's say refugee camps with very very low connectivity or conflict areas. For sure, being able to get access to education
Hmm.
in such conditions, technology can help with that. There are like among UNICEF and other NGOs who are specialized to work in this type of context. There are great experts, for example, from UNICEF who have vast experience in working in conflict areas and helping children and learners over there. But I don't have experience in that.
But maybe in your own, like in your own perspective, your own improvisation, how do you think EdTech, like solutions, technological, like applications, maybe, or could support refugees or students in crisis areas?
Yeah. Well. Of course, providing access to learning. That's I think that's the main way. I've read some research reports on solutions that have been used, like for example, solutions that help you to learn to read have been used in refugee camps. Of course, in those, like reading those that kind of reports, you always get the same, like picture that the circumstances are so difficult that if, for example, you try to gather research data on the impact of these solutions in like conflict areas or refugee camps and so on, it might be that it gets pretty much impossible because the situations are so difficult when it comes to have connection. Sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not working, and sort of the use cases of these solutions get so random and so inconsistent that for a researcher it gets very difficult to be able to collect data in a like a accurate ways. Um, but
Okay, I see.
nevertheless, I think that this is the same applies with students who live in rural areas where they don't have
Hmm.
access to education, they can't go to school and so on. So technology can many times be pretty much the only opportunity how you can like still have access on learning and be able to uh, like learn those critical skills that you need. It also requires right decisions and right kind of support from the decision makers. So it's the whole, like let's say if you're you need to work uh, during the daytime in order to provide food for your family. How would you be able to go to school? So that's a situation that requires uh, right decisions and right kind of support and like a willingness to help children that kind of who need to deal with that kind of circumstances.
Right. Let me move on to a question that I hope will finish our conversation with a more bright note. uh, Looking back at your journey from teacher to global edtech strategist, what lesson gives you the most hope for the future of learning?
Well, I must say that I always get really inspired when I see a solution that is doing something differently, and I would immediately get the feeling that thinking it from teacher's perspective or thinking it from student's perspective, if I get the feeling that yes, hey, this is great, this is like brilliant idea, really well done.
Mhm.
I'm sure this would make teachers' lives much easier, and this would improve learning. Uh, it's always like it's always a nice moment, and I'm really happy to be in a position right now when we evaluate the solutions coming from all over the world, that I do get these experiences like fairly often, that when I look at new solutions and what is out there. It's also one thing has been very like inspiring to see the, like, for example, the African EdTech market and the African EdTech providers, like uh, just going on the website and investigating a bit more, like how does the solution work, and like trying to get that, like the initial understanding that what is this. It's super nice, like very like well rationalized, like what is the benefit of the solution and how it was built and what's the philosophy behind it, and the like all the visuals and everything. I've been like really impressed by many cases like that I've been looking at. So that's been nice to see. It's a new world for me, so it's very inspiring.
Mhm. It's very uplifting. Thank you. Right, we'll getting slowly getting to the end of the interview, but maybe you have some kind of last words, something to share with us.
Yeah, just as a reminder, I did mention at the beginning of the interview that we have now application call open for EdTech companies to be evaluated and listed in the Learning Cabinet. And yeah, I would like to encourage EdTech companies globally to go to learningcabinet.org and then submit the quick assessment if it looks like the right thing for you. Uh, Only takes a few minutes. It doesn't naturally. It's completely cost free, so it doesn't cost anything. Uh, but yeah, I would encourage you to do that.
And in short, what kind of criteria you have to meet to match to apply?
We have now a few focus areas. What kind of solutions we focus on. Nevertheless, you can still submit the quick assessment. It's fine, even if you're uncertain if you match with this criteria. But we focus on basic numeracy and literacy solutions. And then we focus on teacher empowerment solutions, and then future skills, especially with the STEM angle, and then solutions that help with students with learning disabilities.
So accessibility really seems to be a important of importance here. We will of course put links in the description later on to give you easier access. And now let's move on to the last part, my favorite one, rapid fire round questions. I ask you a short question, you try to answer with one word, maximum one sentence, and try not to give it too much of thinking. Are you ready?
Maybe. Oh, go ahead. It's a bit
First question
scary.
was point on. It is scary. It is, I know. Number one, favorite learning app right now?
This is difficult. Any advisor?
Second question, book that has influenced your approach to education?
Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes.
Okay. Another one word to describe the future of education?
Bright.
Bright. Love that. Another one will be tough one. The most inspiring educator you've met?
Well, Pasi Sahlberg.
And the last one is pretty easy. EdTech trend you think is overhyped?
Well, I would say none.
None.
At the same time, I cannot say something without thinking that maybe this solution is becoming great, and the people who have created this kind of solution are just like
Yes, I know.
yeah. So
didn't see that coming, honestly. Right, Olli.
yeah. Everything has potential.
That's true. Thank you for your time. I was really thrilled to have this conversation. You're very insightful part of educational world. And I hope to have another conversation in future.
Yeah. It was a pleasure